Okay. Alright, so this video is just gonna be unprofessional. It's not even a video, it's supposed to be like me being petty, so I'm recording everything because I want to delete stuff off my Twitter. So anyways, so I'm gonna show you guys a video real quick that kind of made people blow up, and then the adoptee Twitter also blew up, so we're just gonna go through everything. More so, we're gonna go through everything on my side of the adoptee Twitter. I'm not gonna go into depth in adoptee Twitter. I genuinely don't care half the time. I'm gonna be honest, but yeah.
Seen a white people have always prioritized pets over black people. Not as a joke, as policy, as culture, as strategy. You ever seen a white woman weep for a rescue dog, but not blink at a black child shot in the back? That's not a quirk. That's colonial memory at work. That's whiteness distributing empathy based on control. They loved the dog because it obeyed, because it didn't talk back, because it couldn't remind them of the horror behind the house. But black people were never allowed to be innocent. They were property, then threat. And the dog got more compassion than the enslaved. Dogs got names, graves, paintings. Black people got numbers, chains, and unmarked soil. White feelings will organize a march for a dolphin, but stay silent during genocide. When Amy Cooper clutched her dog and called the cops on a black man, that wasn't a mistake. That was a ritual. The pet in her hand, the cop on the line, that's the structure. That's whiteness in full performance. Protect the pet, punish black people. It's not about loving animals. It's about refusing to love what they can't control. The pet becomes sacred. The black body becomes target. That's not empathy. That's empire. We remember what they erased. And we're not asking for tears. We're here to haunt. Follow for more.
Alright, so that's the video here. We're gonna go back. So do I have anything to say about that? Honestly, no, I don't, because I actually I actually agree with this. I'm not even kind of, I agree with this because I'm not even gonna get into it. It's not a place for me to get into. I'm not black, so I can't really get into it. So, maybe I'll disagree if my black oomfies, like, disagree, but it is kind of true. There is this prioritization of literally any other lives over black people's lives. We're in such a anti-black, like, society, so society. So I'm not gonna get into that. But what I am gonna get into is the quote tweets of this tweet talking about adoption. And this is where I kind of pop off. This is where I eventually pop off. Anyways, so we're gonna get into it. Okay, somebody says, I don't even know who this person is. I genuinely don't care about like half of these people on Twitter. Like, not even half, majority. I only care about oomphs. But this person says, what's insane is that a white family adopted this woman from a Chinese orphanage when she was a baby after she was abandoned by her birth parents. And she now claims to be a victim of human trafficking and spends all day making the most insufferable anti-white TikToks known to man. And personally, I find this tweet insufferable on like so many levels. But anyways, the claiming of human trafficking, victim of human trafficking. Yeah, no, actually, a lot of Chinese adoption was like Chinese adoptees are. There are a lot of Chinese adoptees who are victims of human trafficking, and it is a whole rabbit hole to get into. And I genuinely encourage people to do their own research because this is an actual thing. And I know people are like, oh, she's claiming to be a human trafficking victim and she wasn't like trafficked into sex trafficking or slavery or something. But no, the human trafficking is any selling of it is selling of people and this and that. And there was a lot of selling of people in China, especially mostly babies. Especially during the one child policy. I have some adoptee mutuals who quote tweeted this who are very pissed about this, like making fun, almost not even making fun, but just like being like, well, look how crazy she is. But there are a lot of Chinese adoptees who feel this way. I personally don't feel this way. I do have other feelings about my adoption, but it's not that I don't feel as if I was human trafficked. I do feel as if there was there was a loss in my life. I feel as if like my biological mother, she most likely did not want to give me up but was forced to because of the one child policy. There was a lot of like hints towards the fact that my bio mother probably wanted to keep me but couldn't, and it's sad. It's a very sad reality. um but a lot of people were saying that, also a lot of people are saying that these babies were abandoned. A lot of it was forceful separation because of the policy and the laws that were in China. So it's a really really sad thing to talk about. And I genuinely, my heart goes out to like all my other Chinese oomphs out there, Chinese adoptees oomphs out there, you know. But yeah, I have any regrets or am I mournful of what happened? Yeah, of course I'm mournful, but am I regretful? Am I do I how do I feel about, being in the United States, you know? Some adoptees feel very resentful. I personally don't feel resentful. My attitude is like, well, I'm here now. I live in the present day, and what can you do about it? But what I can do about it is I can advocate for reforming of the adoption system. And that's what I do. And I do advocate for, I am pro adoption. I am pro, this and that for adoption. But I also believe that there is a lot wrong with the adoption system. And I also think when it comes to adoption, it isn't black and white, especially for anything relating to, honestly, in general, because there's the domestic and there's the international. I mostly focus on the international when it comes to my discussions about it. Um, but yeah, I just think that when talking about adoption, I do think it should be handled with care, as from any party, from international, domestic, from foster side. I feel like there is a lot to adoption that I feel it's like a sphere and you kind of have to come at it from all different angles. And how many angles are there? It's an infinite angle because it's a sphere. But jokes aside, yeah. So what happened next is I was reading the comments because I couldn't help myself. I'm a greedy, gluttonous, silly Billy. So, and then I saw this person saying, "Oh wow, it's happening. Adoptee Twitter is completely insane. They have been pushing this narrative for at least 5 years." No, this has been going on for longer than 5 years. But it's fine if you think that way. We're to actually getting traction. The person replies, Being adopted can really f you up, and I was raised by my maternal great aunt and uncle. Still messes me up my identity until I met my father's side and realized I'm not an alien completely like my paternal side. Imagine being raised by a different race. There is a lot to that too. I'm not really gonna get into this, but this is, I agree. Like, this is really messed up. There's a lot of messed up, and I do think there's a lot to it too. There's a lot of nuance to transracial adoption, which is being raised by a different race, by the way, if you were wondering. Um, it can, but to compare it to human trafficking and blame all your problems for it, and this is where I kind of come in because, like, um, this is once again, I felt as if we were all talking about like international adoption, so that's on me. So we're gonna go into my quote tweets real quick. Here's my cluster of quote tweet. Anyways, this comment section is filled with people who'd rather fight on an issue that they're unequipped to talk about, which I agree with. I do think if you're gonna talk about adoption, you should be very open minded. I try to be very open minded to this person too because they're also even if like as much as, so this person who I quote tweeted is also adopted. I'm not really sure if they're a transracial adoptee, a white adoptee, etc., etc. It kind of does matter when it comes to this conversation because, um, like if it was another Chinese adoptee, I can understand like where your feelings, especially if you are lucky and you do have a good home and you were adopted into a very like privileged position, etc., etc. Personally, that is actually what happened to me. I was adopted into a very loving and good home. I wasn't abused. Well, there's a lot of things to that. I'm autistic, so I did have issues. It was more of like my family not knowing how to raise an autistic child, but they still raised me. I'm still a functional adult, I would think. I hope. I may be a little dysfunctional, but that's okay. I'll figure stuff out. We live and we learn, and that's all we need to do is live and learn. But but like I wasn't abused, this and that, and you know, I personally can't relate to the horror stories that, a lot of Chinese or just adoptees in general face. And just because I can't relate doesn't mean I can't empathize or sympathize with these adoptees or be compassionate to these adoptees, like and I think even though you personally may have not experienced something doesn't mean it's invalid if somebody says that this has happened to them. My experiences as an adoptee, Chinese adoptee, is wholly different from my little brother who was adopted from Ethiopia. His experiences are wholly different than mine, even though we're both adopted. And a lot of it just comes down to intersectionality, and I think that's important to keep in mind. So I'm gonna continue reading. So then I said they look ignorant and stupid when saying stuff like this, which I do kind of agree. But I'll go into stuff. I will say I was kind of being hypocritical here, but I'll point it out when it comes to it. Adoption isn't black and white situation, and you have to have a nuanced perspective. It's literally okay, this is what I said. It's literally human. Okay, so they said to compare it to human trafficking and blame all your problems for it. Okay, so then I said it's literally human trafficking. It isn't comparable, quote unquote, especially for Chinese adoptees. There are so many cases of babies being given up because the parents had no choice. There's sometimes babies were stolen or coerced to be given up to feed the demand for the international adoption market. So then I'll read my clarifications later. This was after I replied to this person. So then they said, I'm adopted. I was not trafficked. Saying I was completely insulted and offense. Saying I was is completely insulting and offensive to those who were. Separation trauma exists. Anything else? Question mark. Or am I misinterpreting your post? I genuinely think they were misinterpreting my post, but okay. It's okay to misinterpret, but I mentioned some things, but you say comparable, you were generalizing, and there are plenty of cases where it is trafficking, so I can't blame adoptees who do feel this way. But, I can understand where they're coming from. They feel like it would be insulting to others to say that they were trafficked, but this is also downplaying and also invalidating other like adoptees who do say that they were trafficked or this or that. And I can understand where you can feel insulted if somebody generalizes, such as the TikToker probably. I haven't seen anything where she talks about being adopted or like the human trafficking and stuff, so I don't really know her takes. I assume that she was probably generalizing, so now everybody else is generalizing, so now we're all in the generalization. But whatever, it's fine, who cares? I mean, it does matter. I do care. So it's okay to misinterpret, but I see some. But to say comparable, you were general. Okay, there are plenty of cases of where it's trafficking, so I don't blame adoptees who do feel this way. I'm a Chinese adoptee. I don't personally feel this way, but I have peers who do, yeah, I do have peers who do feel this way, like adoptee peers, international adoptee peers who do feel this way. Personally, I refuse to get a Twitter blue, so okay, whatever. I'm skipping that. Like, then I said, I do feel as intersectionality does play with adoption, depending where you are adopted from and what the circumstances are in the country, that may change what and isn't considered trafficking. In China, I clarify, yes, there is genuinely human trafficking in the adoption system, which I'm not really going to get into the statistics or anything like that, but there are plenty of articles and books, documentaries that do talk about the human trafficking within like the adoption system in China, especially during the one child policy. China actually has closed They're no longer allowing U.S. Citizens to come and adopt Chinese babies anymore. Actually, I think just in general the West, but yeah, it's a whole thing. So coming down into the to replies, can adoption be exploited by human traffickers? Yes. Is this so? I feel like so before I continue, I feel like this person has a very set like idea of what human trafficking is, um, but doesn't encompass all of like human traffickers, I feel like people are like, oh yes, you steal people and then you sell them to um sex trafficking or this and that. But I do want people to understand that human trafficking comes in multiple different forms. Um, and for adoption, that is literally taking babies and selling them to adoption systems because, for profit. Um, is this something that needs to be taken seriously? And do we need to do everything imaginable to prevent it? Yes. Is the adoption itself human trafficking? No. I don't personally think I ever said that adoption was human trafficking, but now when I do address this, hold on. So this is what I said. I do not ever say adoption is human trafficking. I mentioned specifically for the case of China. I'm a huge advocate for adoption. However, for many systems need reform, especially for international adoption. This is actually why China is closed for international adoption, which I just explained to you guys. Clarifying not adoption in general, on adoption in China where there was human trafficking. Okay, actually going to backtrack because I can see how you can perceive my original tweet as generalizing adoption as human trafficking. I apologize for that, and I am not but I am only talking about Chinese adoptions. But this does reach to international adoptions. Yeah, I have no concept of international adoption, therefore I can't speak on it. So then part of me is like, why do you speak on it though? Um, okay, so then they said we're on the same page. Okay, so then they said international adoption. I apologize if it sounds like I'm talking about adoption in general. I won't sit here and tell you that there aren't major issues in adoption as a whole, domestic and international. There definitely, absolutely are. And I had endless conversations with fellow adoptees who think it's the worst thing in the world, and I could just never relate to that. Totally fair. And I personally could never relate to it either. Like I said, I was, I mentioned a bit. Um, do I feel as if I was personally human trafficked into adoption system? No, I do feel as if there was loss when it came to my adoption. I feel like there was separation, like forceful separation. Um, but do I think my that was personally human trafficking? Probably not, but some could argue that it was. So I'm not going to really get into that. Um, I understand why many adoptees feel this way. Okay, so hold on. Let's pull out the where is it? Alt text. Okay. Yeah, I can't read this. What the hell happened here? Pardon me, pardon me. I have the alt text here. Should be here. Where is it? Okay, there it is. I'm pro adoption, but I do think that there needs to, oh my god, the typos, Jesus. Pardon, pardon. Uh, I do think there needs to be a lot of work done for the adoption system, both in the domestic. I will never blame my adoptive parents for my adoption as the root issue of the adoption, as the root issue is the adoption systems and these flawed programs. For me to I'm talking from an international experience. I would say you say maybe be more careful with your wording and topics of adoption about approach with care. I'm sorry I made you upset or uncomfortable with my confrontational quote tweet, but I do think this is an important discussion now that it has been brought up. Why? What did I say that where I should be more careful? I don't, you know what? To be honest, I think there's a lot of misinterpreting within words from both angles here, so I apologize. Um, I'll be honest, your original tweet came off as dismissive towards human trafficking and adoption systems since the original video was more relating to a Chinese adoption. It was very off putting to read. The video was more not that, but the probably talking about the specific person. I do understand the original TikToker was also generalizing, which I do not like either, but could tell that she was probably coming from a place of the adoptee experience. It is important to look at media critically, even if it's a silly TikTok, which I do agree with. I do think people need to look at things with a more critical eye, especially for things like this. Um, and to this is why we literally have assignments of doing background checks of authors of the book, because you can now you have like, I don't think children, like at the time, like as a child, I fully comprehended this, but as an adult now, I'm like, yes, this is literally why we did this. We did background checks on our books because we don't want to take everything's face value, because when you look at like where the author comes from and this and that, you can see where the influences are or what their experiences are and what they're talking about, so you can fully understand the media that you're consuming. So I think it's very important. So this is then I reply here saying, clarifying things, I'm mostly talking about international adoption. I am pro adoption. I just want to be there to be better reforms for these systems we have, and I will probably not talk about the foster care slash adoption system in the U.S. because that would be out of my depths. So I that's just nothing that I personally have experience with. So I'm not going to talk about that. That is a wholly different story. It is important that I feel like for the adoption community, it is important to know when you're talking to another adoptee where they're kind of coming from. And then obviously not to dox the adoptee, fellow adoptee, but it's just like understanding where your perspective may lie. Um, and I don't think either perspectives are invalid. Like especially if you're international or domestic, I don't think either experiences are invalid. I think both of them are very valid and very like valid to where you're coming from. The problem that I have is when you start invalidating other adoptees experiences and what they're saying. And as like as an in the adoptee community, we really should be uplifting each other and working towards reforming these horrible systems and stuff. Because I am personally, I am pro adoption. I do think people should adopt more. I also think that there needs to be a lot more reformment within these systems. Do I know how to reform them? Not really, but can we continue pointing out these issues and then coming to a better conclusion of how we could? Yes, though I don't think people are really ready for that yet. But yeah, and then I say, not to say that there isn't human trafficking systems in US and Europe. I just do not have the experience or knowledge to say anything. I'm only speaking on international adoption from China as a Chinese adoptee. So, yeah, once again, that is what I'm saying. And I also think what's weird is when it comes to the adoptee community, there is once again there is an emphasis on white adoptee voices over like a BIPOC voices when it comes to adoption. And it is kind of sad to see it like coming back to the original video where it's saying that white people prioritize pets over black people, and it's kind of the same thing. People all prioritize literally anything other than like black people, especially when it comes to these issues. Because my like even if I'm talking about Chinese adoption from Africa or like black adoptees are a whole other can of worms to get into as well. And you could probably find black adoptees talking about that, and there is probably more resentment in that community compared to the like other adoptee spaces. And I would say the Chinese adoptee space is pretty resentful. I've seen some internalized racist Chinese people, and it is crazy. So I think when it comes to adoption, to approach the conversation with care and concern for your like, I do care about this other person. That's why I apologize a lot, because I feel really bad for being so confrontational, but I think it's really important to kind of like understand where others are coming from. I think it's important to have that empathy and sympathy for others. Do I agree with them? I don't know. Somewhat. I somewhat agree with the adoptees who say that, that I don't agree that all adoption is human trafficking, but I do agree that there is human trafficking. I'm not saying that it is all. That's why I don't say all or this and that. I do mention that even in here, I said sometimes babies are stolen and coerced for demand. Did I say, it's all? But yeah. Um. But anyways, that's kind of the whole conversation. Anyways, oh yeah, so actually there's more. There's more. Hold on. Here's my other tweet that I had. Okay, so I said as a Chinese adoptee, I was definitely not abandoned but given up by my bio mother, and I had no who had no choice because of the one-child policy. You do not know uh Chinese adoptee circumstances. I have interest in finding my bio mom? Not really. I'm trying to figure out how to get a job where I live now, so making do with what I have, advocating for myself. Yes, but a majority of adoptees from China. Okay, what is my grammar here? Pardon. Okay, I was given up, and I do think non-adoptees are ready to understand the forceful separation because of government, which it was forceful separation with context in mind, especially when thinking about adoptees between. This is the one-child policy time, by the way. And then here's more that I talk about. I think this is where I got into another conversation. I will never blame my adoptive parents for adopting me. Honestly, I could never imagine my life differently, but I was lucky. Majority of adoptees are not lucky and do not have that ideal adoption inspiration story. Even for me, the adoptee experience was not without struggle. It's hard for folks to hear about abuse within the adoptee community. The stripping of identity of adoptees just because the baby was abandoned does not give people the right to invalidate their feelings or experiences. And this is where a mutual comes in. Well, actually, the mutual has their own take, but I don't know if I want to get into that. Maybe I will. Maybe I will. I feel it. I feel like sometimes the adoptee Twitter, especially white adoptee Twitter, or just people in general, don't understand the nuances of yes, I'm glad and indifferent to I yes, I'm glad slash indifferent to the fact that I was adopted, but also this system is actually really bad right now. Two things can be true at once. Yeah, basically. Multiple things can be true at once. Um, but yeah, and I think a lot of people think that it either has to be this or that, but we have kind of shoehorned ourselves into this or that rather than like looking at things in specific cases or this or that or multiple things can be true at once. I was even having this conversation with my own counselor when it came down to it when I was dealing with stuff. I was my counselor was like, ugly boo, Lou, multiple things can be true at once. You can feel apathetic for a job, but also feel very passionate for wanting to get a job. Um, so I was very apathetic towards the application process. I do not get any dopamine like reception from like applying to jobs. But it's fine. When I do get a job and I do work, I do have a lot of like motivation because I'm getting money. But I also I like I'm a perfectionist. I like doing the work that I'm giving. So, continuing on. Pardon. I am not regretful or sorrowful what could have been or because I live in the present and now. Okay, yeah. So this is what I advocate for. But of course, I think of course people are still allowed to talk about this and that. I personally just like I live in the present. I do whatever, whatever, whatever. Okay, so trying to see. I think this is where So this is the mutuals post. Adoption is 9 out of 10 human trafficking. There's a reason why there's a search investigation on South Korean adoption agencies and why China has closed the availability to Americans to adopt from here there on. That is literally what I mentioned. Okay, the person you quote tweeted, their post is so aggravating and purposefully ignorant. Not many people are aware of adoptees and their issues. Not even folks in China, native Chinese, are aware of Chinese adoptions. It is so unknown for folks. And native Chinese who are aware, they are deeply upset that these Chinese babies did not get adopted into Chinese households or kept in China, which, I agree slash disagree. There are some things that are issues in this argument as well. I'm not really going to get into that. It's kind of the same with just adoption in general. This is the same talking points with just adopting with even within your own race. There's this there's like flaws to these arguments, but I will say, would it be better than being transracially adopted? Probably. Am I gonna confirm that? No. So this is what my mutual says. I'm not against transracial adoption as a whole, but they should be considered the last resort in a way. Which, to think about it, during the one child policy, it was kind of the one last resort. Unfortunately, many families could not afford to adopt children or afford to have another child. If they could, they would have paid that fee already, but they couldn't. So, that's why it was a last resort. Personally, I feel in family adoptions, first, if possible, domestic adoption has issues too that I've talked about, but then the same ethnicity, race adoptions, then the community. As in, maybe that person isn't necessarily the same race or ethnicity as the person, but have a community close that they're active in it. So 50-50 of transracial. And then even transracial adoptions should be, and even then, transracial adoption should then be considered. And of course, not everything is a linear in life, which is true. These people, I just agree with them. That's why I didn't really reply. Also, I was tired, so these people keep bringing this Chinese adoptee up when they're obviously going through the adoptee crisis, and saying that she's selfish and stuff, and it's annoying. It's so irritating. Of course, China has its issues with child laws too, but two wrongs don't make it right. And then crying emoji. Real, real. Anyways, so that was kind of my conversation with this mutual. We didn't really go in depth. It was just like that. But yeah, that's kind of the Chinese adoptee discourse right now. Anyways, I just wanted to make this video so I can just like delete my post because I kind of don't care about like keeping that post up. Also like look at this. I want to like clear my media tab. Look disgusting. Anyways, look at the art. Cool. See, I do kind of like I kind of rant a lot with like text. Anyways, yeah, so wow, 32 minutes. Anyways, I guess I'll be posting this so friends can see it later, I guess. Whatever. Bye-bye. See you guys.